Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. The world watched closely as reports emerged of a serious rupture inside the Belarusian armed forces, an event that many analysts are calling the most
dangerous internal challenge to the state in decades.
What initially appeared as scattered refusals to follow orders quickly evolved into a wider crisis that forced governments, alliances, and international organizations to reassess their positions.
Toward Minsk, the global reaction has been intense, cautious, and deeply revealing of how Belarus fits into the broader geopolitical landscape. In the early hours after the first confirmations of unrest within the army, foreign ministries across Europe issued carefully worded statements.
Most avoided the term revolt at first, choosing phrases like internal instability or serious developments. This hesitation reflected both uncertainty about the facts and a desire not to escalate the situation prematurely.
Still, behind closed doors, emergency meetings were already underway. The European Union was among the first major actors to react. Officials in Brussels framed the situation as a matter of regional security and human rights. Several EU leaders emphasized that any use of force against civilians or dissenting soldiers would be unacceptable. The language was firm but restrained, signaling readiness to act while leaving room for diplomatic maneuvering. Eastern European states bordering Belarus responded with a sense of urgency. Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia increased border surveillance and military readiness, not as a provocation but as a precaution. These countries have long viewed instability in Belarus as a direct security concern. Their leaders stressed that they were not interfering, yet their actions showed clear awareness of potential spillover effects. NATO's response was measured but unmistakable. The alliance confirmed that it was monitoring the situation continuously. Statements from NATO headquarters emphasized collective defense and regional stability, making it clear that while Belarus is not a member, any chaos near NATO borders is taken seriously. Military analysts noted that NATO's calm tone was intended to avoid giving Minsk or its allies an excuse to claim external aggression.
Russia's reaction was the most closely scrutinized of all. As Belarus's strongest ally, Moscow found itself in a delicate position.
Initial comments from Russian officials emphasized sovereignty and non-interference, while also affirming support for stability in Belarus.
This careful phrasing suggested that the Kremlin was weighing multiple scenarios, including the risk that open support for one side could worsen the crisis.
Russian state media coverage added another layer to the global reaction. Some outlets downplayed the scale of the revolt, framing it as isolated indiscipline rather than a systemic problem.
Others warned of foreign influence, a familiar narrative aimed at discouraging similar unrest elsewhere.
International observers interpreted this mixed messaging as evidence of uncertainty within Russia itself.
The United States responded by calling for restraint and dialogue. Officials in Washington highlighted the importance of respecting international law and avoiding violence.
At the same time, there were strong signals that further sanctions could be considered if the situation escalated. The U.S. approach reflected a balance between moral positioning and strategic caution. Canada, the United Kingdom, and other Western allies echoed similar themes. They expressed concern over the safety of civilians and soldiers alike, while urging Belarusian authorities to engage in peaceful solutions. These statements may have seemed repetitive, but collectively they reinforced international norms and applied diplomatic pressure. International organizations also played a key role. The United Nations called for calm and emphasized the need to protect human rights. The Secretary General's office offered to support mediation efforts if requested. While the UN language was neutral, its involvement elevated the issue from a regional crisis to a matter of global concern. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe drew on its long history of engagement with Belarus. OSCE officials referenced previous commitments made by Minsk regarding military conduct and democratic standards. Their response underscored the idea that the army revolt was not just a military issue, but part of a broader political context. Reactions from Asia were more reserved but still significant. China emphasized stability and non-interference, consistent with its foreign policy principles. Beijing's statements focused on respecting Belarus's sovereignty while hoping for a peaceful resolution. Analysts noted that China's primary interest lies in maintaining predictable conditions for its economic and strategic projects in the region.
Middle Eastern governments largely remained silent, though some issued brief comments supporting stability.
This muted response reflected the limited direct impact the crisis has on their immediate interests.
However, diplomatic channels continued to monitor developments, aware that global instability can have far-reaching consequences.
Media reactions around the world shaped public perception of the revolt. Western outlets tended to frame the event as a potential turning point for authoritarian rule in Belarus. Headlines emphasized courage, defiance, and the possibility of change. In contrast, state-aligned media in allied countries stressed order, legality, and the dangers of chaos. Social media amplified these narratives dramatically. Images and unverified reports spread quickly, forcing governments to react not only to events on the ground, but also to global public opinion. This digital dimension added pressure, as leaders knew their responses would be scrutinized in real time.
Economic markets also reacted. While Belarus's economy is relatively small, uncertainty caused fluctuations in regional trade and energy discussions.
Investors worried about supply routes and political risk. These economic signals reinforced the sense that the revolt had implications beyond military barracks. Human rights organizations were among the most vocal responders. Groups documented reports of detentions, intimidation, and alleged abuses. They called for international monitoring and accountability. Their statements influenced diplomatic discourse, pushing governments to include rights language in their official reactions. The global reaction also revealed divisions within the international community. Some countries prioritized stability above all else, fearing that unrest could lead to prolonged conflict. Others saw the revolt as a symptom of deeper governance problems and argued that change, though risky, might be necessary. These differences became evident in diplomatic forums. While there was broad agreement on avoiding violence, opinions diverged on sanctions, mediation, and recognition of potential new leadership structures. This lack of consensus limited the scope of coordinated international action. Belarusian diplomats abroad faced intense pressure. In several capitals, embassies were questioned about the situation, while protests formed outside some diplomatic missions.
These scenes illustrated how global reaction can directly affect a country's presence and image overseas.
The role of neighboring Ukraine was also closely watched. Kiev expressed concern while emphasizing that it would not interfere. Given Ukraine's own experiences with military and political upheaval, its statements carried particular weight and reflected a cautious empathy. As days passed, the tone of international responses evolved. Initial shock gave way to more analytical assessments. Governments began considering long-term scenarios, including prolonged instability, negotiated settlement, or a forceful crackdown. Each possibility carried different risks for regional and global security. Think tanks and policy institutes published rapid analyses, feeding into the global reaction. Their reports highlighted the unique structure of the Belarusian military and the significance of internal dissent. These expert voices helped shape elite opinion and informed media coverage. The global reaction also included quiet diplomacy. Behind the scenes, Envoys and intermediaries explored potential channels for dialogue. These efforts rarely make headlines, but they are often crucial in preventing escalation.
Several countries with historical ties to Belarus offered to facilitate talks. Public opinion in many countries showed strong interest.
Polls and online discussions revealed sympathy for soldiers refusing unlawful orders, alongside fear of instability. This mixed sentiment influenced political leaders, who had to balance moral support with pragmatic restraint. The crisis tested international norms regarding military loyalty and civilian control.
Commentators debated whether the revolt should be seen as insubordination or as a form of conscience-driven resistance.
These debates fed into broader discussions about the role of armed forces in authoritarian systems.
As the situation unfolded, some governments updated travel advisories and contingency plans. These practical measures signaled seriousness without overt political messaging. They also reminded citizens that global reactions often include protective steps that are not immediately visible. Cultural and academic communities responded as well. Scholars of Eastern Europe and security studies were invited onto global platforms to explain the historical background.
This educational aspect of the reaction helped audiences understand why events in Belarus matter internationally.
The longer the uncertainty lasted, the more cautious official statements became. Governments avoided strong commitments, preferring flexibility. This approach reflected lessons learned from past crises, where early rigid positions limited later options. Despite the caution, one message remained consistent across most reactions: violence would worsen the situation.
Whether from Western democracies, international bodies, or regional neighbors, the call for restraint was nearly universal. This consensus underscored a shared fear of uncontrolled escalation. The global reaction also highlighted Belarus's strategic position between major powers. Any shift there affects security calculations across Europe and beyond. This reality explains why even distant countries paid attention to what might otherwise seem like an internal affair. As analysts looked ahead, many noted that international responses could influence the outcome indirectly. Sanctions, diplomatic isolation, or engagement strategies all shape incentives for actors inside Belarus.
The revolt thus became not only a domestic struggle, but also a test of international leverage. In the end, the global reaction to the Belarus army revolt has been a complex mix of concern, caution, and calculation.
It has exposed fault lines in international politics and demonstrated how quickly internal military dissent can become a global issue.
The world continues to watch, aware that what happens next in Belarus will resonate far beyond its borders. Whether the crisis leads to reform, repression, or prolonged uncertainty, the international response will remain a critical factor shaping the country's future and the stability of the region.